Energy Transition, episode number 63. Our topic today is Degrowth or Regrowth, the energy consequence. Good morning, Irina Slav, Temi Nimet, David Blackman.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And good afternoon in Europe.
Let me show. I saw that David, Irina, and Temi published some articles today morning. And I would like to share, and if David would like to comment his article a little bit to the audience.
Yeah, that's a Texas legislative update that I do every week with Jason Modulin, who's the president of the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. We had a session that's active in Texas right now through the end of May, and a lot of good stuff happening in it for the voters in Texas. And also, we talked about a big win on a ballot proposition that happened in El Paso, where they had a proposition that would have required the city to move to all renewable energy by 2030, which would have cost billions of dollars to the taxpayers in the city of El Paso, and they rejected it by 82% to 18% vote. So it was a really neat win.
They're not ready.
Not ready. And Irina had several today too. I saw this one as related to. Sorry, Nimet.
Tammy, yeah.
Yeah. What's exactly this one, Tammy?
Yeah, that was really interesting. Geopolitical Futures often does these interesting dives into things. And one of the things they noted was that in that recent earthquake in Turkey, it affected and did damage to the oil distribution centers and possibly the pipelines. And so then I'm like, well, okay, is it possible to protect pipelines from earthquakes like that? And then Luca had an awesome reply and gave some information about how that was done on the TAPS line in Alaska and provided some links. So good to check that out.
Excellent. And Irina, I saw one for metals. I'm not sure about that. And this one was for scramble.
Oh, the one about metals was for oil price. I wrote it a few days ago. This was about the energy transition and how its proponents have to scramble to make it make sense in the face of reality, which is reasserting itself, increasingly hard.
It requires a lot of propaganda, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. But it's not enough.
Not enough.
It will never be enough, just propaganda.
Yeah, very good. Okay. Tell me, please, the expressions degrowth and regrowth, is there a common sense about what they mean?
Well, there's an entire degrowth movement, and it's really, I would call it a modernized rebranding of the Club of Rome's limits to growth. And it's really been an expansion of that and into a movement that includes various groups on the left and some of these more progressive corporate players and whatnot. And so the Degrowth or Beyond Growth conference, which is going on right now that we had a little chat about in an email this morning at the European Parliament, is organized not only by the Club of Rome, but by the Green Party, the left, or Die Linke in Germany, or what used to be called the Communists and Allies Party, but then they just subsumed themselves and changed the name to the left. Also, the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats and a few other leftist parties, they're all in on alignment on the need to transform the economy for degrowth. And what I sent around this morning was the president of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, opened this Beyond Growth conference. And she praised the Club of Rome's limits to growth and said that their most enduring point was, and I'll quote here, that the growth model centered on fossil fuels is simply obsolete, end quote. And she went on to say that the spirit of the EU Green Deal is degrowth or beyond growth. And she went on to say that leaving the fossil fuel growth model behind us is the central tenet of the EU Green Deal. So what does that mean exactly? Well, degrowth is that exactly that, degrowth. You shrink or reduce the standard of living because you're shrinking and reducing the economy. And you do that by phasing out reliable fossil fuels. And so they needed to be phased out as quickly as possible to basically what they call ripping off the Band-Aid so people can just get used to this new way of living with smaller living spaces, less food, less, mobility, and so on and so forth. And we're just going to have to get used to it because we should be more caring, sharing, and collective. That's degrowth in a nutshell.
Without energy, of course, David and Irina. Oh, sorry.
Well, what drew my attention in Ursula von der Leyen's speech was the repeated focus on well-being. We're going to move beyond GDP and focus on indicators that themselves focus on people's well-being. That was the focus. She didn't talk about reduced consumption of energy or reduced consumption of everything else because of this lower consumption of energy. She kept repeating people's well-being. And what was funny, I don't know who writes her speeches, but they need to be fired. She said that limits to growth, this Club of Rome document from 50 years ago, she basically said that even 50 years ago, the fossil fuel-based economy was obsolete. This is why her speechwriter needs to be fired. It could not have been obsolete 50 years ago. And plundering Mother Earth and all this, propaganda messaging. But the other thing is, well, perhaps it's not her job to note the specific ways in which this degrowth, beyond growth, movement will be, enabled. It was just general talk about how we are going to start caring more about people's well-being by providing cleaner air. And I might be mixing the messaging with something else I read on degrowth, but that was, I think, the gist of it. We're going to start caring more about people's well-being. How? We don't know.
No.
Or we're not saying. Because the whole time when I read her speech, and every time I read something else on degrowth, this question just repeats in my mind. How? They don't say how this is going to happen.
Yeah.
Because it is going to happen the way Tammy said it will happen. We'll have to get used to consume less of everything, including basic things that we need, such as energy and food.
Yeah, and it the central point is the central point that the transition is not really, as their propaganda says, about replacing fossil fuels with plentiful and abundant wind and solar energy and battery backup, and replacing gas-powered automobiles with billions of shiny new electric vehicles that cost 30% more. What it's really about is limiting your ability to move around and live your lives, and limiting your ability to use energy, because they understand as well as we do. We all spend our time talking about and writing about the fact that you can't really replace fossil fuels and nuclear energy in power generation with these intermittent sources of energy. You can't. It defies the laws of thermodynamics and physics, and they understand that. Ursula von der Leyen understands that reality.
Do you believe that she understands this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, she understands it. Joe Biden understands it. Jennifer Granholm, I don't know what Jennifer Granholm understands, but most of them understand the reality that their talking points are false, that this is a movement to severely limit and control people's lives. It is not a movement to clean up the environment. It's a movement, as Tammy pointed out in the email, that is focused on implementing socialism, a government system of socialism. Ursula von der Leyen, what does she refer to it as, Tammy, in her statement?
The social market economy.
Yeah, the social market economy, and talks about how that, protections. She constantly repeats the Leninist focus on workers' rights, protecting workers' rights. It's all about protecting workers and the proletariat and all that nonsense from Vladimir Lenin. And so in that, her statement is very remarkable. If you really read what it says and get past the propaganda and the code words, it is a truly remarkable endorsement of a socialist style of government. And that's what this has always been about. And it's, they're coming closer and closer as time goes on to overtly really talking about what their real goals are. And, her statement today is just another example of this progression. They're feeling more and more comfortable about talking about their real goals.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, but David, this is a very good point. So the world was always tried to control demand and supply of and price of oil and gas, and they failed. Almost always they failed. We have OPEC on the one side, wars and sanctions on the other side. So how they can think to make this degrowth happen?
Well, but we have to remember that in the past, the main reason they failed to control all that is because the United States and Canada and Europe, those countries function on free market economies. And so the market, at the end of the day, market forces and factors have always prevailed. As a result, the United States was far and away the biggest economy in the world. It still is. Although in 3 or 4 more years it won't be. China will surpass the United States economy in all likelihood. But now what they're trying to do is force an ability to control all that by converting these governments away from a free market style of economy to more of a controlled economy. I mean, we talk a lot about this movement towards authoritarianism in the West that was really kicked off in earnest during the COVID pandemic, and all the controls that were tested during that time by the responses of the various Western governments to that pandemic. And they see that they had great success and very little pushback from the population. And, it was pretty easy to control everybody. And so if you pay attention to the statements of Klaus Schwab and other leaders in the World Economic Forum, they talk very openly about all this and what their great reset is all about. And so, they understand that these free market economies have always thwarted their efforts to control the flows and prices for energy. And so what they're focused on now is really trying to convert how those economies actually function. And that's a significant part of Ms. von der Leyen's statement today, too. So, they're not stupid people. They understand all this. They just, have a hard time talking openly about what they're really doing.
Because of the implications of that, right? I mean,
Right.
if the public understood that it meant a reduction of their standard of living, and that's the, a benefit, a feature, not a bug,
Right.
then people would be like, wait a second, no, I don't want to give up my house and my car and the ability for women to feel safe moving around, and instead of like the transit systems in the West or at least in North America, are a disaster, very
Yes.
unsafe for women. So yeah, I mean, if they knew, and which is why they kind of hide it in a way in how they express these things.
Right.
That's why they say it will be good for everyone, because we'll be, taking care about your well-being, not about gross domestic
and your
product.
equity. It's all about
Yeah.
equity.
It's basically a new version of the centrally planned economy of the former Soviet bloc. It's totally
absolutely.
version 2, and people in the West, a lot of people in the West, cannot sense it, cannot feel it coming because they've never been there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Grand finale.
Does anyone believe diminishing the economic growth of developing nations, making them dependent upon IMF loans, will leverage their influence on forcing them to adopt destructive green initiatives?
They're not trying this. I mean, they are trying with Africa, kind of. They're trying to push Africa to embrace renewables and, give up trying to exploit its own mineral and hydrocarbon resources. But it's not working, is it? I mean, based on what African country leaders are saying, it's not working. And it's not going to work with Asian economies.
No.
So they're focusing on themselves.
Right.
Yeah, and China's also set up an alternative to the IMF for developing nations, which doesn't have these same strings attached, right? So
yes,
there's an alternative there.
Alliance, right? That's through the BRICS Alliance. They've set that up, and that's why 19 of those developing nations have applied for membership in what? The BRICS Alliance, and that's
BRICS Plus.
BRICS Plus. It'll be BRICS plus 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 plus. You'll have to add a lot of plus marks.
With 19 countries.
Yeah.
Coming to that's right. You see that this may be a lobby of renewables groups?
Well, renewables are part of the whole process. Hook them on with this is clean power, get them to pay more for it because it's clean. And even though they try to sell it in marketing terms, they're trying to market it as a lot cheaper, a lot more affordable than oil and gas. It's not. No. And I think I mentioned this is in today's piece. When people start wondering why is my electricity bill still higher, even though we've built so much wind and solar, why is it still higher? I bet that the answer would be, well, because we need to build even more and we need to fund this additional building of capacity, but it will never be enough.
Yeah.
That's the thing that people can't know because it's not being talked about. It will never, ever be enough. And so electricity becomes a lot more expensive than it used to be. And we are forced to use less.
Yeah.
So we can afford it. It's really simple. Just make something prohibitively expensive and people will start using less of it.
Right. Which is the whole point, right? I mean, the EU plan, their 10-point plan or whatever after the Russian invasion was like one of the main ones was reduce what you're using. So by making it super expensive, you're reducing what you're using. And then that helps.
It is the same thing that they're doing with coal, for example. I cited a local Bulgarian nuclear economist. He did calculations about the cost of coal power here, which is like over 150 euros per megawatt hour. But most of this cost is the cost of the carbon permit that the generator needs to buy from the European Union market. And this is how you make coal non-competitive. This is how you make it non-economical. And this is how you push wind and solar. See, they're much cheaper. Well, yes, because you don't have to buy carbon permits.
Right.
Because you made them that way.
And David, that's like the new EPA rules they want to bring in where the plants have to reduce their emissions by 90%.
90%.
Like really.
Yeah. And with appliances, you see it happening with appliances, the attack on natural gas or gas stoves, the attack now on dishwashers, they're going to place heavy new restrictions on dishwashers, refrigerators.
This appliance, you mean? This appliance?
Right. Yeah. They're going to make all of those more expensive.
They're going to get to the vacuum cleaners too.
And the vacuum, of course, yeah.
But
they did in Europe already.
Yeah.
They did in Europe already with the vacuum cleaners. Yeah. They reduced how much power you can so you end up having to vacuum for twice as long and it still doesn't get all the dirt out.
But you're using more energy effectively because you have to clean for longer periods of time.
Yeah.
It's like the low flush toilets.
I got to tell y'all about a new initiative from the Department of Energy that came out over the weekend. because they're going after gas stoves, right? And they understand that induction electric stoves are vastly more expensive than gas stoves, and the conversion from gas to electric costs a lot of money and all. So now the Department of Energy is initiating. They've gotten some funding from the IRA to create a fund that's going to provide $840 credits for you to remove your gas stove and replace it with an induction electric stove. So that, and they'll say, well, now your induction's cheaper, right? But they don't factor in the $840 cost of the federal subsidy into that calculation.
But please keep my coffee maker. I cannot live without coffee.
No, that's right. Yeah, I'm not giving up my coffee maker. I love it.
But tell me, who are the supporters of these ideas? The governments or private entities? Who are them?
That's such a good question, and it seems to be proliferating at this point. As I stated at the beginning, this EU conference is being supported by the left, by the socialist, communist, and they changed their name to the left so that people don't realize it's the communists, but there's a lot of foundations that are funding this stuff. So, for example, there is a group called Degrowth. There is Project Drawdown, which is at the University of Pennsylvania. They get a whole bunch of foundation money. There's, I forget what it's called. There's another Beyond Growth. There's a Beyond GDP movement, and it's a movement. And so there's lots of different foundations, like the Tides Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers, BlackRock, Bloomberg Philanthropies support a lot of this. There's a whole bunch of European foundations like Heinrich Böll Stiftung and others that support these initiatives.
All media.
And the media, and it's all part of like Covering Climate Now or whatever, where their modus operandi is to spread out climate news whenever possible. So there's lots of these different groups involved, and they've pulled in the corporate people as part of the ESG movement. So they're like all intertwined. And whether the corporations understand or not what degrowth actually means is another question altogether. But I think a lot of them believe that if they just jump on this bandwagon, they'll somehow be protected in the long run, that somehow they'll be safe.
That's the perception,
That's the perception, and that's how they get buy-in. We see that, for example, Suncor in Canada, which is one of the biggest oil sands producers, has a foundation, and they give a lot of money to environmental groups whose whole purpose is to shut it down, the oil sands. So they're funding groups that state specifically, we're here to put you out of business. And they think somehow they get a pass by doing this. So it's like this alignment of leftist groups who are trying to put forward these policies. And if I can just quickly point out, there's an election going on right now in the main oil producing province in Canada called Alberta. And right now, a conservative government is in power, but its main competitor is the NDP, or New Democrat Party. And what people don't understand is that in their statement of principles, they're a socialist party. And their whole point is to transform it into a socialist economy. And people think, oh, well, they just care about the environment. It's like, no, that isn't what they are. And so it's like with this degrowth thing, they just pretend that it isn't socialism, that they're just caring and sharing. But it is socialism. And unfortunately, maybe people don't understand what that means anymore.
Yeah, but the thing is, you say socialism, but from my experience, and Bulgaria's experience, this is a subversion of the socialist idea, which put poor people in focus. And truly, it didn't seek to make everyone equally poor.
Right.
Wow.
They sought to make everyone equally. But again, there was talk about the well-being of the people, everyone being equal, which is obviously impossible, which is why the original socialist idea failed. But at least those leftists, the old leftists, cared about the poor people and the workers, the proletariat. Now, billionaires like Michael Bloomberg and the Rockefeller Foundation, basically, the left has become that against which it was fighting for decades, last century. It's it's ironic and it's tragic and it's funny if you can see the humor in it. But yeah, we have billionaires pushing socialist ideas that have proven not to work.
David, your conclusions to our podcast today.
Well, before I do that, one last point about UPenn and all those foundations. If you look at who's giving them money, an awful lot of their money is coming from China. Penn University, remember, had the fake professorship thing set up for Joe Biden. And Joe Biden, that was funded with $80 million from the Communist Chinese government. Okay. And a lot of those foundations, the Tides Foundations and others, Rockefeller Foundation, take a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars from China.
And that's public.
And so China is, going in through money. Oh yeah, it's all public information. And so this is how China is pushing socialism in the United States anyway, or one of the many ways they do it. Conclusions of all this. Well, I think the key conclusion is that the energy transition is not about a transition to an equally sustainable and affordable set of clean energy sources to replace the fossil fuel and nuclear energy we currently use. It is about diminishing your standard of living and diminishing your ability to move around through restricting your access to energy. That's what it is. It's what it's always been, and it's what it always will be. And the people behind the energy transition pushing it all are becoming bolder and bolder as time goes on in admitting what their real goals are. And that's what we saw from Ms. von der Leyen, her statement today at the opening of that event.
Tell me the probability of these things can happen, 0 to 100.
On the trajectory we are right now, I would put it at 75 out of 100. But I'd like to just tie something in with David's point. If we think of the energy transition as a move to maybe bring the West into socialism with Chinese characteristics, we'd have to look at the Made in China 2025 policy, which they brought in 2015. And it was a 10-year plan to shift most of the heavy and technological manufacturing to China. And now they're talking about how China is going to be the largest automobile exporter, which has been the fundamentals of both the European and North American sort of markets, was automobile manufacturing and exporting. So if China then diminishes the ability for the West to use fossil fuels to keep their economies and manufacturing capacity going, then that shifts to China, which of course is doing the all of the above strategy, using coal and nuclear and everything else. So that gives them the fulfillment of their 10-year plan by diminishing the capacity of Western nations to produce and manufacture high-tech automobiles, all of the different chemicals and so on. And so therefore, I wouldn't say that this is regrowth. I would sort of dispute that term, Armando, that it is degrowth. It is what it says it is. And whatever regrowth would happen, I don't see happening, because it's all about, like David and Irina said, bringing us down to equality, but at a really terrible level, much lower than we're accustomed to.
Irina, your comments too?
I think the West is actively seeking new ways to kill itself, and it's finding them.
Period.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Was a great conversation. 30 minutes, but very intense content. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Have a great week, everyone.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.